What is going on, guys? Today I have a no game, no life deck profile. And this is a profile for a deck that I haven't talked about in a while. It's undergone changes since the last time I profiled the deck. And there's just some things, I just wanted to profile it again, talk about some things with the new version. It's not like the craziest changes, like it's not a completely different build that I may want to do in the future. I've been testing a couple of builds for no game. But yeah, I just want to go through and explain some things, and specifically I want to talk about like 8 standby, because that seems to be the version that's just been picking up popularity or has been most popular, and sort of talk about why I don't personally like it on like a fundamental level. And if you want to hear why, I will explain once I get to the level 1 game. But for now, I'm just going to start with level 0s and sort of explain them and go along. Starting with 4 of your Shiro Runner. So this is your mill runner. On play, you top check 2 and put them back in any order, which is amazing for setting up triggers, and specifically setting up standby. And there's a bunch of cards this synergizes with in the build, and I'll explain those when we see them and explain how they synergize with the runner in their way. And of course, just +1 when you open it, which is very good, or it attempts to get a +1 anyways. 3 of your Riki. So it only Rikis for Sora and Shido cards that are equal to or lower than your level. So if you're level 0, you can only get level 0s, but it's still just a +1, which is really important because honestly, no game's biggest weakness is hand size in certain situations. It does a lot of things really well, but hand size can be the downfall of the deck if you let it get that, or if you let it get to that point. So the Riki helps you get your +1, which is very nice. On attack, you give something +500. This also is one of the changes that the deck underwent, and it fixes the yellow count a lot. Like the yellow count was really low before. This sort of fixes that, and it's just really, really good card for getting 2 specific cards in particular. And then we have 2 of this Steph. So this Steph is very good at hand fixing and also making sure you have your king event. When she's sent to waiting room from stage, you can discard a card, salvage your king event, which is very important for your consistency overall. She's also the biggest thing at level 0, which is pretty relevant because your 0 count, your entire level 0 is just very, very tiny. So you got to be aware of that, which it technically helps you reverse deny by crashing your characters, but you're not winning a lot of lanes at level 0, which can be annoying. 2 of this Sora. So on play, mill 2. If there was a climax against +2 soul, which is great whether you hit or not, because either you're going to swing big for damage or you're not going to swing big for damage, which depending on the situation both are good. And then on play, top check, if it's an event or character, add it to hand, discard a card. So hand filter, mill 2, just very, very good. Honestly, I think no game no life is like the king of mill. I know other decks technically mill better, but when you need to mill in no game no life, I've gone through my entire deck turn 2 and turn 3 several times when I have a bad deck state, which is great. But this is one of the cards that has synergy with the Shido in particular. If you're really, really looking for standby and you play this and you look at the top 2, there's no standby cards. You can just play this and delete 2 cards and just try to get to your standby quicker. I'm speaking of how I want to get to standby quicker. Why do I feel the 8 standby version is not that great? Again, I will get to that in the level 1 game when I explain a card pretty in depth. Next is 2 of this Jabril. It has the same mill 2 effect as the Sora, except when it hits a climax, you can mill the top card of your opponent's deck, and then select a character in the waiting room and put it back on top. So obviously, if you delete a climax with this, it's insanely high value. It's a pseudo game ender, and again, you can use it for the same reasons to get your standbys if you need to see that. And then on play climax salvage. So again, good hand filter. You have 4 mill 2s here, and they both hand fix. So it's really good for bad deck states and flooded hands, so it's pretty consistent. 2 of this Shido Brainstormer. So this is one of your main targets for this Riki, is you want to see this brainstorm really quickly. Why we play 2 is we usually only want to see 1, and I stand by it out a lot, and there's just big space issues, I think, in this deck for all the things I want to play. And instead of running 3, which I would normally play 3 of a Brainstormer I want to see very quickly, but I'm running 1 of this Steph because this Steph does fulfill a purpose that this Shido can't. This is a tap self-search Brainstormer that on play Scry, which is super good for technically being a reveal 5 Brainstormer. But this Steph is your full wall combo. You can still attempt to wall in this deck pretty well to deny reverses. or get pluses in that way, because again, you don't want to lose all your hand entirely, so getting field pluses is pretty helpful in that regard. And this is like a revenge counter sort of deal, so it can get more pluses besides being a brainstormer, but it's a rest 2 salvage brainstorm. So obviously, like, rest 2 can be tough sometimes because you want to trigger a standby. And in your rest 2, obviously you want to have like an open slot in your back row to stand by a target out. But having the option to salvage is super good, so it's pretty versatile for that. And again, the revenge counter is very, very good when your deck hits a power level that can sort of wall if it just gets that small boost. So that's it for level 0s. The biggest change is definitely the Rickies. Honestly, like, the biggest change in the deck is the Rickies, because I wasn't running them before, and like, they're generally not played in a lot of builds because they're not like the greatest, but honestly, almost feeling a little mandatory when you realize the deck's biggest weakness is its hand size if you're not hitting good brainstorms and getting the compression you need. And on to level 1, where this is where I want to like bring up the point of 8 standby in particular, because I think 8 standby is, like, in my personal opinion, I think a lot weaker than this card and its combo. So this combos with the pants. And this card is pretty much everything I think No Game No Life needs in one card. And I'll sort of explain what I mean by that. So No Game No Life with 8 standby, I don't think the deck naturally supports 8 standby. Decks that go really good with 8 standby usually have like either amazing standby targets, or a huge reason to be running 8 standby, or great standby supports. You know, like Overlord has the Shaltir, or not the Shaltir, the Albedo, and the level 2 Imes that both sort of make your standby stuff really good. And No Game No Life doesn't have that, except for this card, in my opinion, because... So I guess I'll explain the combo and explain this card before I get any further in depth into that idea. So this might be a longer explanation, but I hope you guys are wondering why I think this. So it gains 500 for every other game character you have, making it 6k base, which is a lot better than the Jabril you would normally play with 8 standby, if you were going that route. And then on attack, if the pants is in play, look at up to the top 2 cards of your deck, choose one, put it either on top or bottom of your stock, and send the other to waiting room. So it's a stock charge, and it might seem like only a stock charge at face value, but the way this thing stock charges is amazing. So first of all, you're never going to blind stock a Climax, which is very, very relevant. If you hit 2 Climaxes with it, you will stock charge a Climax, but it won't be blind. Next, it is on attack, so, you know, being uninteractive is very important against some decks in the metagame, because, you know, reverse combos can have a struggle versus Wally decks, or if it just doesn't get the opportunity. So both of those are very good, but also you can use this as 2 ways to support standby. It can put standby targets in your waiting room technically. So if you swing with this and you see like this Steph, you can reveal another card, put the other card in your stock, and put a Steph in your waiting room. So you can set up standby targets in this way, which is great. And then you can also use it as a pseudo twin drive, which I like to do a lot. So say you really want to trigger a standby, again, you reveal this Steph off the top. Well, it's obviously not a standby, so if you're worried the next card could be a standby, or a statistical chance for it to be a standby, you can just send this to stock instantly, and you technically have gotten another card off the top of your deck that's not a standby. So you can use it as like a pseudo twin drive in that matter to like further push yourself to triggers. So I feel like this is the best card to support standby in the deck, and obviously you cannot do that if you're running 8 standby. So I feel like this card is really what makes the deck, and also it being stock charge is really like super relevant for so many cards in your deck, particularly like the King event, because it will eat your stock, and you want to be brainstorming every turn with this deck to keep up advantage. This card to me is personally the reason I think the deck is good. Plus it means you're running pants, which if you trigger pants, again, it's technically like running more standbys, because you can obviously salvage your standbys, which is great. So I feel like you need to be playing this card, in my personal opinion. If you like 8 standby and it works for you, that's great. But I've tested it, and personally, I just don't think the deck naturally supports it. Plus, running pants gives you more damage, and that's really good. So I think this stuff is great. And some people think you only can play this card in the version that runs the Sora level 3 Game Ender, and I don't run that card, which is, I guess, a spoiler alert. But honestly, you can run this card without it. Like, it's just a super good combo. Next up is 3 of this stuff, and I know I spent a billion years talking about this Shido, so I'll kind of go through everything a little quicker. That doesn't need any explanation, which this stuff is a 1175 with hand-on core, just your level 0 standby target, very powerful. 2 of this Shido anti-change. So this is your anti-change backup. It's one of the, I think it's actually one of the best anti-change backups. So pay 1 and clock yourself from hand. So you're taking a damage with it, but since you're sending something away from the field, you're only taking 2 attacks that turn. So it's not like you're taking a huge chunk of damage. And it's pretty resource efficient, not being discard 2. So that's one reason I like it, but the fact that this is a level 1 anti-change, which a lot of decks don't have, I think some decks do, but it's few and far between. This card is just super, super good. Can catch your opponent off guard if they don't know you have a level 1 anti-change. So if you're level 1, you're playing against a Goblin Slayer who doesn't know the no-game matchup, and they think you're level 1, there's no way you can anti-change their Priestess. Well, you can, so it's pretty good. I'm playing 2. It was at 1. This is another change, and I'm playing it at 2 more as a meta call. Obviously, my friend has Goblin Slayer, so I play against it a lot, and this card's very good. And I think 2 is very viable. And for your King event, pretty much the main card of the deck, you want to see this, and this is also a reason I called this deck can be the King of Mill. You have this, which is a pseudo Brainstormer, so you pay 1 for the event cost, and then you mill the top 4 cards of your deck. Well, you reveal up to the top 4 cards of your deck, select a game character, add it to your hand, and then this goes to memory. So compression, milling, you technically mill 3 cards with this. You have 4 mill 2s, you have Brainstormers you can do. You can mill very, very quickly in this deck, and that's what I've said. In bad deck states, I've gotten rid of my deck turn 2 and turn 3 before. So yeah, and also when this is in memory, being a card of compression, it gives you global 500 on your turn, which is super good if you have 2 of these. You're just 1k bigger, which is good because this thing is getting up to 8k, 9k sometimes on offense if you have your other support, which is very, very powerful. This thing hitting 10-5. So yeah, just this King event is very important for your level 3 as well. So very important you set up 1 to 2 of these in your memory. And I know that was a lot of explaining for the level 1 game, but I really wanted to talk about that Shido because she's the reason I think No Game No Life is kind of good. I know people don't say this is the greatest deck, and I'm not trying to say it's the greatest deck either. It's, definitely got its issues, and it's not the strongest thing, but I think it's really, really underrated because it's actually quite powerful, in my opinion, again. So 2 of this Sora, so this is our main standby target at level 1, which might seem weird because obviously it's not the most powerful standby target. It's a 1k global. But you need it for your level 3 game, which I will explain once I get there. And being a 1k global is great for walling and just giving some extra power. Also, it's pay to tap itself to search a game character. You have a stock charge combo that if you pull it off, at least 2-3 times a game, you have extra stock to work with. So if you're bleeding hand, you can refill it with this. It's a heavy cost, so you shouldn't use it often, but sometimes you need it, and it's there when you do. And then 2 of this Steph, because personally I think this card is better than the 2/2 Jabril. If I was playing 8 standbys, I would run the 2/2 Jabril, but running this means we're a standby deck that's not weak to bounce, which is great. This card, if you have a full field, you can play it and put a game character from your waiting room into your stock, so it's a 2/0, and it gains 1k for every other, so 10k. So naturally, on a full field, she's, first of all, bigger than the 2/2 Jabril, which I really like. She's not weak to bounce. In fact, she's a 2/0 10k, so high value. But this is the standby target I choose to play because, again, not running 8 standby, this card is good as a standby target and in your hand, and I would just draw kind of dead draw 2/2 Jabrils, and again, I don't think No Game can support 8 standby that well, so that's the short and sweet level 2 count. On to level 3. 4 of the strongest card in the deck, in my opinion, your level 3 game ender. So this Steph is really good. She combos with standby, and I kind of like when level 3 game enders combos with standby because you can sort of make your game ender play an anti-compression style. So she combos with standby, and so on play, top check 3, add 1, just good +1 effect on play. On attack, you can discard 2. to burn your, well, she gains 3k when you do that, and then burn your opponent X, where X is equal to how many of the king event is in your memory. So you do want to set up 1 or 2 of this. Sometimes 3 if your opponent's not compressed, and then she can deal huge damage. But what I really like about her is the fact that she's really good against pretty compressed decks, because the standby is not giving her a soul, and if you set up 1 to 2, you're swinging for, like, if you play 3, you're swinging 2 6 times, before triggers, which, it means some of your attacks should stick, and she can push a lot of damage. So she's a game ender that can push through compressed decks and also deal big damage to decks that don't have crazy compression, so things that aren't like Kemono Friends or Hatsune Miku or decks like that. So she's really versatile in that sense, and if you know the matchup, you can set up how many king events you want beforehand, and that's really good. So I really like the Steph +1 on play, which is good for her cost, because it essentially means like you need to discard 1. So yeah, I really enjoy Steph as a game ender. And honestly, my level 3 is almost always just 3 Steph. That's just what I set up. But we do have 2 Jabril here as an option. She's a healer, so that's why I want the option, And she has another on attack, discard 2, burn 1. So if you didn't set up the Steph, this can be like the same effect, kind of, but weaker. And on a heal, so she is there mostly for the heal. And then 3 of your money counter, this blank doesn't lose event. So this card is important to set up in some matchups if you have like the resources to set it up. It's again why this card is one of your main standby targets. You need a Sora, a Shiro, and a Steph on field. To use it, it's pay 5, sack a Steph you control, to send one of your opponent's characters to waiting room. Just a really good money counter because it's a sack counter, so you can sack a Steph in front of something that needs to reverse. And then it also gets rid of something instantly, so you can, on their first attack, use this and then get rid of something that's like an on-attack Climax combo. Just a really good money counter for dealing with threats that deal damage. And yeah, just the fact that it's a sack counter. And setting this up can be difficult, but as long as you finish your game-ending combo with like 2 stock, it means you can swing 3 times. And if you had 7 cards, all you need is 8 stock and 8 cards in hand, which actually isn't super hard because you have brainstormers and clocking, and you can get 8 cards in hand really quickly. You can set up triple Steph and your money counter, which is it won't happen every game, of course, but if you're like going for that play, you can set it up pretty easily actually, as long as your brainstorms weren't completely terrible. And then Climax is 4 pants and 4 standby. Obviously standby is super powerful. And I think the pants combo is just so good. And pants is a really good support to standby, I think, right? It means you have more standby, so even though you're not running 8 standby, you could see the trigger, the Climax, like more than you would running any other Climax. And the fact that this can salvage itself not only means you have your Climax combos more, but the fact that you can salvage pants off pants means you're not losing like the damage game like most standby decks do. So while this is supporting standby, it's also like fixing standby's weakness in my opinion. And I don't know, I really love pants standby as like a Climax lineup. So yep, that was the deck profile. I probably explained it way more than I needed to, because I've done this profile before. You guys have probably seen it before, but if you haven't, I wanted to go over it again because it is one of my favorite decks. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. This was Top Tier Gaming, and I will see you next time.